Good morning and welcome to Wednesday, May 11th, 2022 edition of the National Newspaper Publicists Association's Let It Be Known. Some bad news for one legendary Black college and some good news for students at another. But we begin with a report by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which says inflation reached 8.5% in March, the highest since 1981, putting everyday necessities like food, gas, and rent out of reach for many. And like most economic downturns, including the Great Recession and the pandemic, Black communities are disproportionately impacted. This means that Black households are now spending more of their post tax income on necessities like food and energy, according to a new report. We discussed that this morning and more with Aswad Walker of the Defender Network in Texas, Spelman College professor of economics, Romie Tribble, and Dr. Ron Williams, a professor at the Coppin State University School of Business. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And we will start right away with Dr. Tribble, professor of economics. Dr. Tribble, inflation in Black America, how bad is it for us right now?
Well, I think it is quite bad for us in a way because inflation erodes the purchasing power of one's dollar and makes it extremely difficult to engage in transactions in the marketplace. So it is a rather difficult time for us in terms of inflation. Our incomes tend to be low to begin with on average, and then to have those incomes eroded by inflation, of course, is a difficult task. And we are talking about inflation dealing with food, energy, utilities, and housing, which are fundamentals in terms of one's standard of living, if you will. So it's a major concern. On the flip side of this, of course, this has been a period where unemployment itself has fallen considerably. And so we've always been the last or the least of those when it comes to benefiting from employment. So having the lowest unemployment rate in recorded history at this particular point is a benefit to us, but the trade-off in terms of inflation is a tough one.
Yeah, and want to bring Dr. Ron Williams into the conversation. Dr. Williams at the School of Business at Coppin State. What does this mean overall, though? Because you know that old saying, when white America gets a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. When you speak to your students, how do you boil this down for them?
Well, I really point out to them and try to get them to understand how disproportionately we are affected when situations like this arise. And there's a term that I learned recently, and this is probably more in Dr. Tribble's lane, but inflation inequity, just about how we are really impacted disproportionately when inflation happens, but also how those who are more well off are able to recover more quickly, primarily because the goods that are made available to them are in greater variety, because of companies seeking higher profits. But that puts us in a position, especially if we are lower income people, where we have less variety available to us in the marketplace, which compounds the impact of inflation upon us. We just aren't able to recover as quickly as those who may be at higher income levels. So it's really important for our students to understand that they're starting from a different place. And if you can get your mind wrapped around the fact that you are starting from a different place when these unfortunate economic turns come, then you can strategize a little better about how you're going to recover and overcome the situation that you're facing.
Yeah, and Aswad Walker of the Defender Network, I know you've done some reporting as well on the economy itself. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 3% of minimum wage workers were Black Americans in 2018. So when you think about that, Asad, and put this all in context, what are you seeing in Texas, and what are you seeing overall, and what's the solution? I mean, we always making a way out of no way. Asad, you're on mute.
What we're seeing in Texas is interesting to me, because on one level you have people struggling. On another level, you have the Great Resignation going on, which one person I interviewed said, we as Black folk need to look at that as the Great Renegotiation. We need to renegotiate our stance with employers. But when I'm doing articles, I like to pull out my professor hat, because I'm also a professor of African American Studies at the University of Houston. And so I try to bring the historic context to the articles, because history shows white folk have this monumental head start that you've already discussed, but it's because of several very specific things that folk don't talk about when they talk about that black white wealth gap.
Right.
Purposeful land theft, the GI Bill that we did not get full access to. It was called the Great Democratizer, yet we didn't get equal access to the benefits. White domestic terrorism, when our businesses were putting white folks' businesses in compromise, what they saw as compromising situations. Redlining, purposeful devaluation of Black homes, the Black tax, so many things. So I try to bring these into context, because if you talk about how inflation impacts us disproportionately, or you talk about the white-Black wealth gap and don't give it any context,
Right.
then what many people will come away with is thinking that all of those stereotypes that they say about us are actually true. But we've got to give some historic context. And so that's what I try to bring when we're doing articles about this subject, or any subject, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Tribble, inflation tends to hurt workers. Black Americans constitute 13% of the U.S. Workforce, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So as inflation increases, it seems like Black America is hurt the most. Can you talk about that a little bit, as far as Asad just laid it out too? Why is it that we always tend to get the short end of the stick? Now we're talking about the economy, we're talking about inflation. It all affects us, right?
It does. It does all affect us. And I think when we look at economic recoveries, and we are basically way past the recovery. I think we're in an economy that is expanding, growing. And when we have this surge of growth, we are the last to be brought into this stream of growth. And so as this recovery matures, growth tends to become inflationary. And so this inflationary phase is now coming. And of course, it comes at a time when the economy is in a mature growth stage. Okay. There is no doubt that when we look at inflation, there is inflation inequality or inflation inequity. So that the inflation that transpires at the lower income level, where many Black people exist, is a different kind of inflation, because there's a limited range of choices, as one of our commentators already indicated. When you're a very wealthy person with wealth, you have a range of choices. You have, not only do you have a range of choices, but you have wealth that allows you to leverage yourself in such a way that flexibility is all important. If I'm a wealthy person and gasoline's a problem, maybe it's time to buy an electric car, you see. But if you are low income now, those higher energy prices that are really putting it to you inflationary, you don't have any range of choices here. So the range of choices are problematic. As I said before, my concern is that the policies that are being recommended now to deal with inflation are also going to be problematic, because although they may reduce inflation, they may also increase unemployment. We are the last to be hired and the first to be fired. So my concern now with the Fed's posturing about higher interest rates is though higher interest rates are going to mean higher levels of unemployment, and we're going to be the ones that really going to experience that. So this is a conundrum for me, because I would like to see unemployment go down as low as possible, because the lower it goes down, the lower our rate goes down. We have to keep in mind now, our unemployment rate is still higher than everyone else in the economy, even though at the national level, it's 3.6%.
Yeah, how about that? And Dr. Nicole McDaniel writes in that Sean Rochester wrote a great book on the subject called The Black Tax, Quantifying the Cost of Economic Disparities Over Time to the Black Community. Dr. Williams, when inflation rises like this, when it's increased like this, doesn't that actually mean a pay cut for folks?
Absolutely, it does mean a pay cut, but I really think, and I appreciate my colleague's comment before about the historical context that we really have to put this in, because the reality of it is we have been in a 600-year nightmare, so to speak, ever since Africans landed in the Western Hemisphere involuntarily. It's been a tremendous barriers that we have had to overcome. So I really appreciate the comments about the historical context, because all of the quality of life determinants, whether you look at it from a perspective of healthcare, or whether you look at it from an environmental justice perspective, or work, or even personal safety, or any of those emotional well-being, financial well-being, regardless of the quality of life and the determinant that you examine when it comes to inflation or business cycles or economic cycles, we have a harder or more difficult time recovering and navigating. So we need a different strategy going forward. If we can put it into that historical context and then begin to strategize based on that understanding, then we'll be able to do better. We just launched an entrepreneurship center about a year and a half ago on Coppin's campus, but we can't continue to do the same thing, because the strategies have gotten us marginal advances, but we really need to rethink our strategy entrepreneurially and how we approach business and economic advancement, economic mobility. From a strategic standpoint, it won't happen overnight, but it will be a long trajectory. But we have to think of it in a historical context, a historical justice context, to realize how we arrived at where we are and how we're going to progress and move forward.
I like the way Dr. Williams broke that down. 600 years, he said, and keep that in mind. Aside, and piggybacking off of Dr. Williams, Paris Brown of the Baltimore Times writes in that Blacks operate from a handicapped position as we have limited choices across all industries. Can you speak to that a little bit more, Asad?
Sure. So the prices at the gas station rising, that's only the tip of the iceberg. But what that means is it costs more to actually go to work. I was just having a conversation with my wife yesterday. Her job is trying to pressure folk to get back in the office, but it is more economically feasible, and folk feel more comfortable, more productive doing work at home. They don't have to deal with, putting on the mask, or, all the things you have to deal with, all the micro and macro aggressions you might experience at the job. And so it impacts us that way. But if you're in a situation where you don't have the choice and you've got to, do what the manager says, that puts you at even a more deficit. I mean, it said that inflation gives workers a 2% pay cut, but 78%, according to Forbes, 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and most of those are Black folk. And so what we see and what we're reporting on one level are people having to face that conundrum. But on another level, on a more positive side, you see more and more Black women and men going into entrepreneurship and seeing that as literally the only way that we're going to be able to make it out of this matrix. So there's all kinds of things going on, but we've got to, I think, like the doctor said, keep the historical context at the forefront.
Yeah, and Dr. Tribble and Dr. Williams, before we let you guys go this morning, talk a little bit more, and let's start with you, Dr. Williams, about inflation inequality.
I think there's a real education thrust that is needed. It's not that we haven't been educating, but I think that there now calls for a new learning paradigm, not only in our academic institutions, but in our community institutions, and we need to collaborate a little differently, because once we become aware of inflation inequity and the fact that those who may be at the lower end of the economic ladder may have a more difficult time climbing out of situations that occur, then we need an education posture. And that's one thing that I'm advocating. There must be more interinstitutional collaboration to inform people about what inflation inequity even is, and how, as institutions, we can work together. And there must be a lot more community building. I'm advocating an emphasis on the affective learning domain. There's been a lot of emphasis on cognitive and psychomotor, but we just haven't been able to get along. We are on a trajectory right now. This is a pre-pandemic statistic that by the year 2053, the median net worth of Black households will be zero. How are we going to correct that trajectory? All of those things that I mentioned must happen in order for us to get some traction and positive movement toward reversing that trend that we're on now.
Like that, Dr. Williams. Dr. Tribble, again, this inflation inequality, what can you leave us with this morning to chew on and perhaps put into play? Dr. Tribble, you're on mute.
One of the things that I would say as we depart here is that we in Black America do need of economic development, and we need a strategy of economic development focused on our communities and the needs of our communities. Firstly, we need more Black financial institutions in the community who are able to address the community economic needs of our people. Major banks in particular are often not interested in extending credit for housing, for business, yet we do need our own set of financial institutions. At the other end, we look at the everyday person in the Black community, more financial literacy. Now, I do understand that a lot of people are a little bit up in arms about indicating that Black people need to engage in financial literacy, because there's this view that, if we're going to insist that Black people engage in finance, what are we going to get on the other end from those who probably had made financial literacy an issue to begin with? It's not Black people who actually cause financial literacy to be such a problem. But I do think that that is a starting point. One of the things that we've been talking about quite often here is the fact that we need to talk about how to interject financial literacy and banking, for that matter, in our high schools. There are high schools in this country where, in fact, students actually have their own banks, and they learn financial literacy in that respect. We've got a large number of people in our community who don't have banking accounts. Okay, imagine the inflationary implications of not having a bank account. We need a range of businesses that can provide goods and services at reasonable prices. When we talk about inflation, Black people in the community deal with inflation all the time because at the end of the day, they do pay much higher prices relative to the prices in other parts of major cities. So that inflationary implication is one that they deal with every day. But I think economic development is important. I would dare say that there's been a discussion in this country about reparations. I think that although I may not be in favor of trying to devise a reparation plan for each and every Black American in this country, I do think, and I think the others would agree with me, that to the extent that government, United States government, has been responsible for some of these distortions in our lives, that there is a need to press the government about making some form of compensation. I think about in the community where many people have lost their homes. They've lost their homes as a result of government decisions. Redlining is a government decision. And it's high time now that the federal government in particular begin to address all of these communities where they have imposed redlining and made it extremely difficult for African Americans to accumulate wealth. But wealth inequality does mean inflation inequality. And I'll end there.
Yeah, Dr. Romie Tribble of Spelman College and Dr. Ron Williams at Coppin State University. We really thank you. We hope we can have you guys back again as we continue to talk about the economy, talk about inflation. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank
Let it be
you.
known. Aside, we move on this morning. Lincoln College held its final graduation ceremony Saturday after more than 150 years. The predominantly Black Central Illinois school will close its doors this coming Friday, citing significant challenges from COVID-19 and complications stemming from a recent cyber attack. According to the Lincoln Heritage Museum, the school was the only college named for Abraham Lincoln while he was still living. It opened in 1865. Aside, this is awful news that this historic, and Dr. Chavis is joining us. Hey, Dr. Chavis, good morning.
Good morning.
And this is, Dr. Chavis, I'm talking with Aswad Walker of the Defender Network here. We're talking now about Lincoln College. It's closing its doors this coming Friday. 150 years, Dr. Chavis and Aswad. Aswad, this is horrible news, isn't it?
Horrible news. And the first thing I think about are the HBCUs. In my general area here in Houston, we have Texas Southern University, and just right down the road, Prairie View A&M University. And the difference between the two, Prairie View is a part of the Texas A&M system. So they have that backup, but you could also argue they have less autonomy as an institution. But when I hear about Lincoln closing down, I again go back to those historic factors that we talked about when the focus was on inflation, because just as those impact individuals, they also impact institutions, and they impact our ability to fund and support those institutions. Now, there's also the discussion that we need to have about we still need to do what we can do, but just seeing an institution that has been looking out for us and our interests when no other institutions would, that is literally a crime, and it is heartbreaking to see that.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavis, this is a school that had 1,200 students as of last year, but then of course the enrollment rate continued to be hurt by COVID-19 and other systemic problems there. It's always sad, I'm sure, Doc, to see an HBCU struggle, and now to see one close.
Absolutely. It should be a call to arms for Black America. And I agree with Aswad, and I agree with what Dr. Tribble and Dr. Williams said before. Listen, this is the history. It's the past, it's the present. Our job is to help shape the future by learning from the past and by dealing with the contradictions of the present. I was going to ask Dr. Williams before he left. There was a brother born there in Baltimore where Coppin State is, who defied the history, who defied the odds. His name is Reginald F. Lewis. He was the first black billionaire. He was born in poverty, but had a sense of not, learning the rules as a lawyer, a Wall Street lawyer. But he decided to engage at a higher, almost global level, and he became the first black billionaire as a result of doing that. I do think we need to huddle, Aswad. I think we need to get our best economic minds, our best political minds, our best cultural minds, our best religious minds, away from the mainstream media, where we talk about and plan. And I'm not putting the media down, but I'm talking the black media plays a different role than the mainstream media. And I think that when we, I really, at our convention next month, Stacey and Asad, we really need to be talking about this issue of blacks and economy, blacks and inflation, and what we're going to do about it. We understand the problem. The question is, what can we do about it to alter so that the future is not a carbon copy of the past,
right?
And that's our challenge.
Absolutely. Well, on the flip side, some good news for an HBCU students graduating from Wiley College, a historical black college in East Texas, were told at their commencement ceremony that an anonymous donor had paid their balances. Wiley College said in the news release that over 100 students were gathered for graduation on Saturday when the school's president made the announcement. He says, "We are constantly communicating with donors to assist students in these ways so that they can begin their after-college experience with less debt." The college said in the release that the estimated total for the balances owed to the college by the graduating class of 2022 was about $300,000. You all might remember Wiley College. They were featured in the 2007 movie The Great Debaters, which starred Denzel Washington and inspired by the 1935 debate in which Wiley prevailed over the University of Southern California's nationally known powerhouse team at a time when the nation was heavily segregated. So some great news there. We bring you one side, but here's the other side, the $300,000. But it also speaks aside, and Dr. Chambers, to this continued push for student loan forgiveness, right?
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad you said that. And since I'm here in Houston, I have to bring everything back in Houston. So
Sure.
Denzel Washington came to Texas Southern University, where he was mentored by the late Dr. Thomas Freeman to prepare for that role. But it's beautiful that there was this anonymous donor that made a way. But you speak to the fact that we also need policy changes in order to help us in our movement towards economic freedom and other freedoms. But with those policy changes, we also need to check ourselves in terms of our own actions. I know here in Houston, 5 years ago, as a result of people feeling helpless with one black person after the other being shot and killed by police officers, the conversation was, well, what can we do? And the Shrines of the Black Madonna, the Cultural and Event Center, started the Buy Black Marketplace almost a decade ago now. But now in the Houston area, it's a movement. There's all kinds of Buy Black marketplaces. So that's helping us change our spending habits on one level. The other thing that's happening in the news here in Houston is this movement by the Harris County Commissioner's Office to have disparity studies of Metro, the transportation, the Port of Houston, all the ISDs in the area, all the public colleges, and the Harris Health System, one of the biggest health systems in the country, did their disparity study and found that 0% of the contracts were going to black businesses. So we need the policy changes, but we also need those studies so that we have the ammunition to hold these institutions accountable, especially in cities that are so as diverse as Houston is, yet all the money is still going to rich white males.
Yeah. Well, Doc, as we come to a close this morning, speaking of HBCUs, the NNPA and Chevrolet have a great program, right, for HBCU students. I'll let you talk about it for a minute.
Right, and it's open enrollment right now. We're looking for 6 African-American students who are in communication and journalism. Right now, you can apply and you can get a $10,000 scholarship for this summer, plus a $5,000 stipend, and the use of a 2022 Chevrolet Volt electric car. So, and Houston Forward Times is one of the papers that's going to host one of those fellows. So please, if you know any HBCUs too, I know there are a lot at Texas Southern University. Please go to nmpa.org/Chevy DTU to apply. You can still apply. The deadline is, I think, it's May 16th.
16th.
So please,
yep.
So please apply for DTU. Discover the unexpected. A great opportunity for HBCU students in journalism and communications and media.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And Aswad Walker of the Defender Network, we certainly appreciate you. We hope that we can have you back to talk more news and headlines that affect Black America. Thanks for watching. Let it be known. We will see you tomorrow.
God bless.